I'm here with Michelle Bowman, the Assistant Athletic Director of Compliance here at Butler University. How are you?
I'm good. Good. How are you?
I'm doing very well.
Good.
So to start off, why did you want to pursue a career in compliance? Did you always want to work in it, or did something like pique your interest?
So I went to law school and I wanted to work in sports and law. At first I thought I wanted to work in professional baseball. I don't know, that might still be fun. But I stumbled into compliance as kind of like an after school job.
Yeah.
The school that I was working at, they needed student workers, and I had a 3L, like an older student mentor.
Yep.
And she was like, I think you would like this. I was like, okay, cool, I need a job. So I just kind of stumbled into it. So I really liked it. College sports has always been something
that's kind of where
that's
I'm at,
pretty fun.
Yeah.
So.
What are your main responsibilities of your role? What sports do you supervise, and are you a member of any organizations that correlate with compliance?
Sure. So I guess we'll take one thing at a time. I supervise women's swimming as the primary sports supervisor. I'm the secondary and kind of a rising primary for also women's lacrosse. So in terms of supervision, those are my sports. I also have a staff that I supervise here. So Melinda, who we kind of passed on our way in, and Anya Householder, who is a Ball State alum. I forget what her maiden name was. But they're both academics and compliance staff. They report to me. Okay. They also report to our academic associate AD. But I supervise them in their compliance capacities. I'm a member of NAC, which is the National Athletic, it's NAAC, but essentially it's like the compliance people's national organization. I don't remember what it stands for.
Yeah.
But in terms of like actual organizations, I'm a member of that. I guess technically I'm also a member of the Indiana State Bar. I'm licensed in Indiana. My license is inactive. I don't have any desire to be in a courtroom or actually use my license in an official capacity, but I have it and I pay dues to the state once a year. But in terms of like what I do, compliance is essentially a risk management position, and that's for the athletic department. I guess we've got kind of like zones of interest. Like close to us would be obviously our student athletes, coaches, administrators, people who are here doing athletics business. They're kind of like the closest people. But we also interact with the university at large, whether that's financial aid, admissions, general counsel, housing, residence life, the dean of students, Title IX office. We have connections and touch points across campus. But essentially we're just a risk management office, and most of that risk is like somehow lumped into the NCAA rules, whether that's making sure our students are meeting academic metrics or our recruiting practices are meeting NCAA rules, financial aid, if we're meeting NCAA rules. That's kind of like the lane that we live in, but at the same time we also get kind of pulled out of that lane in terms of just like general risk to the athletic department in the university. So
how does the hierarchy work here in the compliance?
In the compliance office, so let me pull up our staff directory. It'll help a little bit. We're a little bit different than some others. So these folks here under administration, these are our senior staff. And then down here, I'll skip to compliance. So within our little academics and compliance section, I report directly to Molly Sullivan. She's our senior staffer. She calls herself Reformed Compliance. She used to do compliance, but hired me so that she doesn't have to. So I report directly to Molly. Melinda and Anya here report directly to me for the compliance portions of their jobs. Sonia Hopkins is our associate AD for academics, and Jen Mann reports directly to her. And then Melinda and Anya, in their academic capacities, they report directly to Sonia. So however many of this, 6 of us, we're kind of the student athlete
Yeah.
services
Mhm.
type department, with Molly and Sonia being on senior staff, and then I'm kind of in the middle between Jen, Melinda, and Anya.
Okay.
If there's like a level that goes into it. So, yeah, we tend to fall in the student athlete services,
Sweet.
kind of a sector.
Sweet, sounds good. All right, so how do you and your staff manage compliance with recruitment and eligibility standards for student athletes?
Carefully is how we manage it. No, there's just a lot of information. So for us, and I think it would be the same for other compliance offices, policies and procedures are important, because there's just a lot of data. There's just a lot of information, a lot of different scenarios. Recruiting practices for football is going to be different from any other sport, and like they're all on their own kind of set of recruiting rules and things like that. So that adds a lot of variability of like, you can't really compare the two. Even within like men's and women's soccer, should be kind of comparable, but they're really not they're not the same.
Yeah.
Baseball, softball, not the same. So we have to treat each team differently, but we try to build our policies and procedures in a way that will meet everybody's needs. We try to use technology whenever we can. I think Ryan would agree with this on his side, but have like a really strong hatred of paper. We don't do things in paper, because it just weighs me down and like puts me having to work from the office. But B, like there's a lot of things that we just need to be able to synthesize really quickly. And recruiting is one of those places because we just have data points on, I would say, thousands of recruits. Across all of our teams. Some of our teams start recruiting pretty early, so like you could be a sophomore in high school, or coming out of your sophomore year, and those are like kind of your first data points of actual contact with coaches. Most teams, they've been watching, like you can evaluate students just about any time you want. So they'll have evaluations and things like that, but the recruiting history kind of tends to start that summer after sophomore year, which is pretty young. Whether I like that or not, it's not something to ask my opinion on, but so that just adds a lot of data points, because our coaches are casting a wide net, and then they narrow in with their class. Academically, we're a little bit different than some bigger schools. We're different than maybe like FBS schools, I would say. We're probably comparable to people here in the Big East, with the exception of UConn, because they're an FBS school. But, our academic staff, they are more academic coordinators. They're not advisors. So they're really monitoring the academic progress of all of our students towards their degrees. They'll have meetings with them weekly or bi-monthly, whatever the student needs, but they're not advisors of record, which is different in some other places like Ball State. The student athlete support services, they are advisors. They kind of have a dotted line to athletics. We're not set up like that. Our students get advised by faculty members, so we're kind of on the monitoring end of things from an eligibility standpoint. I think being a smaller school, like we have curves in our degree programs and things can get weird and a little quirky, but being at a little bit of a smaller school, I think that makes things a little bit more manageable. Being set up the way that we are, if we were at a bigger state school, that would be a lot. But I think it's an important mission of the university that students have close interaction with their faculty members, and we're here to support that. We just kind of like make sure they stay on the straight and narrow, because regular students don't have eligibility benchmarks that they have to meet, but ours do, and they can get kind of strict. And we have to quantify it, which is a little bit different than anybody else. So.
Okay, gotcha. Now, what steps do you take to make sure that coaches and relevant staff are following the rules that the NCAA has?
So I send a lot of emails. I send out just a lot of random hey, saw this in the news. This is a good thing to know. But also we meet with our coaches. We have rules education sessions,
Okay.
at least 3 a semester. Summer gets a little bit wonky because nobody's really around, so they're mostly getting emails from me. I also try to meet with each staff at some point during the year to talk through, it could be seasonal items or just have a little bit of a touch point in person, and give them a little bit of special attention, extra attention outside of a bigger group in case there's something they need.
Yeah.
And then from there, my cell phone is always on.
Mhm.
I'm in the office just about all the time unless I tell people I'm working from home. So I'm always available. And there's a lot of information and tip sheets that come out of us. We do onboarding with all of our new staff, coaching staff, hoping to branch that out to like athletic department staff. But
Yeah.
that's kind of how we try to do the rules education piece. And then from administrators, we all kind of live up here, so it's easy for me to walk down the hall and talk to folks. But, getting in front of our ticket office, we're involved with the pass list, so we talk to the ticket office all the time about who can and can't get free tickets and things like that.
Yeah.
The same with athletic training, our communication staff. We're pretty well involved with just about everything.
Okay, sweet. So do you guys give training to coaches and relevant staff to give them the opportunity to learn about compliance and the rules and regulations?
Yeah, so it is an obligation of ours for coach education. Like when we have a new coaching staff, we're responsible to make sure they know what they're doing before they go out recruiting. There used to be a recruiting exam that the NCAA wrote that we could just give to them. You have to pass it with an 80%. Boom, you're certified. That's gone away, which is fine. So now we have a little bit of an onboarding process.
Okay.
And it's mostly me. I've got a set of PowerPoints that I've used for our new staff and go through a lot of the information is the same, but I'll switch it up for like their specific recruiting rules or things that we've encountered here with that particular sport, kind of like personalize it a little bit. But we do that with all of our coaches within the first, I would say like 8 weeks of their employment. I'm hoping to branch that out to the rest. I'll say, I should maybe put, before I wish this into existence, I want to try to get that to all of our staff.
Okay.
We have a lot of seasonal staff that come on and off and part-time staff, so not always the most feasible. But I do want to have like a touch point or something with most people who get hired, just to A, let them know who I am, that I exist. And B, just to be like, hey, here's a few things to like keep in mind. It's going to be different for everybody. This spiel is not going to be the same for the ticket office part-time worker versus sports information, or our athletic trainers need a whole host of other sets of information rather than other people. So trying to bridge that out just a little bit.
Okay, sweet. What things do you guys do to make sure that athletes are educated about potential issues with eligibility and compliance?
Yeah, so we meet with them every year.
Okay.
At the beginning of the year, that's going to be pretty consistent across, it should be consistent across all Division One. The first week of school sucks because compliance officers across the country are reviewing beginning of the year student athlete like onboarding forms and just doing the same team meeting 15 times. So the first week of school sucks for everybody. It's not just the students.
Do you do it like spring sports? Do you also just do it at the beginning of the year, or do you wait until spring?
No, we try to hit everybody in the fall at the same time. We are able to get basketballs during the summer because they tend to be here. So that's takes 2 of them out. But we batch things up where we can. In terms of baseball, softball, we'll do together. Tennis, golfs, we'll do together. The content is mostly the same. We're talking about eligibility. You've got 5 seasons, your 5-year clock, 4 seasons to compete. Medical hardships a little bit. Financial aid. I'm our financial aid administrator within the department, so I don't get too in the weeds, but we do talk about athletic scholarships when relevant to the people in the room. And then other things like extra benefits or some of those like buzzwords, NIL, the transfer portal. We provide a little bit of education to student athletes at the beginning of the year. Talking about the transfer portal at the beginning of the year when everybody's super excited is like a weird thing to do, but there's just not a better time to get in front of everybody and provide the information at the same time. So that's what we do in terms of like face-to-face. At the end of each semester, also between Anya, Melinda, and I, we try to go out to practice and just have like a 3 to 4 minute, hey guys, just remember X, Y, and Z things. Just like tell them a few things, not a full PowerPoint. Like, we just want them to remember some like out of season, out of semester things and try to document it that way. We also have a Canvas page that we've put a lot of like written materials on. I hope that they look at it. I can't guarantee that they do. But I think they do. We also use it as like a notification system. So our academic staff, when they've got program, like next week, they're going to do some programming on how to register for classes for the spring. They're going to do a little workshop. They'll send out an announcement over Canvas that says, hey, registration workshop is tonight. So I think we get decent traffic through Canvas as like a place where information lives. And we have a lot of the NC rules written into little one-sheeters or a copy of the PowerPoint that we used at the beginning of the academic year during our team meetings. My contact information is all over our Canvas page, as well as our academic staff. So hopefully they look at it. I don't know that they do, but it is available to them if they wanted to, and we also mention it at the beginning of the year.
This is a little off topic, but you talked about the transfer portal. In class, we were discussing the APR. How is the transfer portal like gonna affect the APR?
All of it. Yes. It's affected APR. It depends, and the APR, this is an area of ranting and raving, but with my boss and I, but like the APR rules are not the same as the transfer rules, so that puts scenarios into play where a student is leaving us eligible and is eligible to compete at their next school. But because of how the APR rules are written, we're losing points on them. It's a mind-numbingly stupid blind spot, and a place of outrage, flat-out outrage, because APR is tied to postseason competition. So if you have one bad year, not even a bad year, it could be like a meh year, but you have enough of those in a row in a 4-year average, you can find yourself below 930, and then you're ineligible for postseason competition. There's the whole recovery plan that goes along with that, which is tends to be a reduction in practice hours, which you substitute with study hall hours, other academic programming. You also have to notify all the students, so if they want to leave because they can't go to the NCAA tournament, they can. So there's a lot. Also, like, all of that gets publicized. Like, the APR gets publicized, so your rates go out in a press release from the NCAA, and then our president also gets a copy of our APR scores. So it can be embarrassing in a very dramatic way very quickly because of the transfer portal. Well, not because of the transfer portal, because the rules written by the Committee on Academics do not match those written in the legislation written by the membership. So structurally, we've got two different things.
So as you obviously know, rules and regulations often change. What do you do to stay updated on these changes, and what challenges does this bring to not only you but your department? Everything changes pretty quickly, it seems like. I'm a member of a lot of listservs, so whether that's information coming out from the NCAA of just like random announcements, we get a lot of information from the conference office, whether that's the Big East or the Pioneer Football League is our football conference. Mostly the Big East, but we get stuff from the PFL. which happens to also be the Missouri Valley. It's the Missouri Valley staff. But so we get information out that way. I try to disseminate it to our coaches whenever I can, whenever relevant. The coaches are also getting information about, say, new proposals that have been adopted, new proposals that are up for vote from their coaches associations. So when there's things to vote on, we try to get the input of our coaches. Administration is going to, and mostly our senior staff and athletic director are going to choose our stance, but the coach input on it is important because they have to live with the consequences of the rules. So we try to do that efficiently whenever we can. But it's hard, especially in like this transfer landscape with the windows changing. We haven't had a consistent transfer portal year since its inception, I don't think. Since 2018. It feels like the rules have changed at least once a year around transferring since the portal became a thing. And we try to put that out to the students appropriately and in a timely manner. This is where Canvas is kind of a helpful tool for us, whether it's, I write up a new transfer info sheet, I put it on Canvas, and we send out a notification that says, new education materials available at, and a link to whatever the page is. For students to review, particularly with transfer rules, it's not something we want to, we want the students to be able to make informed decisions, but I don't want to encourage them to go into the portal. So a lot of what we do is maybe a little bit more on the passive side with transfer rule changes for our students. Just the coaches know that these things are happening. They're talking to their students. The students and the coaches tend to have a really good conversation about transferring before it even gets to me, which is very helpful. And then anytime we have a student who wants to transfer, I request that they come in and meet with me, either in person or over Zoom, so that we can go through what it looks like to transfer, some rules and regulations, kind of an education touch point, and then just like how to check out at the university, make sure your bill's paid, turn in your keys for your dorm, don't trash the place, stuff like that. We try to do all of that with our students as they decide to go in the portal.
Sweet. Is it more challenging for a prospective international student to gain eligibility as opposed to a normal recruit, and why?
I think that's a little bit sport specific. I would say, generally speaking, yes, because they're coming from a system that's different than the U.S. But the NCAA Eligibility Center, and I think they do a great job. They have obviously seen a lot of international students and know kind of how it works. The weird place for us when I'm like pre-screening international students for our coaches is outside competition. It's like, okay, what are your club teams? What is the structure of the club team? Are they paying for some things? It can be okay if they're paying for things, but how much? When did you really graduate from high school? That's not always super clear as you would think it would be, because that kind of kicks off the timeline of when you need to enroll in college to avoid delayed enrollment penalties and stuff. So it requires a little bit more detective work. The Eligibility Center is great though. They've got the procedures down for international students. The hardest part is on our side when we're trying to pre-screen before we get to the point of because for me as like an area of risk, whenever I can, me and my staff, we pre-screen our recruits, whether that's academically or outside competition, all of this like adjacent stuff, before they sign the scholarship agreement, because I don't want to go under contract for nearly $70,000 for a student who's going to have to sit a year. And it hasn't happened, things tend to work out, but I think to the annoyance of our coaches, I want us, especially if somebody looks like they're close or there's something wonky going on, I will hold back those scholarship agreements as long as I can, as a risk mitigation tactic.
If you could change one thing about your athletic department aside from funding, what would it be?
I mean, some more staff would be nice. Oh.
I mean,
that falls into funding. No, there's not really anything. I really like Butler as an institution. I really like our athletic department. So I don't have a whole bunch of things. It would be nice to have, instead of Anya and Melinda being split between compliance and academics, it'd be cool if, or both of them were academics and I got a full-time coordinator, that'd be cool. But I don't think that's a huge deal necessarily. I think we do a lot with what we have. But I do think Butler is in an interesting spot as like a smaller liberal arts school with non-scholarship football, going into where we could be going with all of this. But I mean, I don't think there's a ton that I would change.
Okay. You guys are a non-scholarship football?
Yeah. All of the Pioneer League schools are non-scholarship football. So it's like us, Stetson, Davidson, Marist, San Diego, Presbyterian, St. Thomas. St. Thomas is in our conference until they go into the Missouri Valley and they add scholarships. They were the Division III. They got booted from their Division III conference because they were winning too much. So they came to us as a non-scholarship football program, and then there's a transition period.
They went from D3 to FCS.
They did, yeah.
That's a big jump.
It is, yeah. So, we're non-scholarship football. The rest of our sports are in the Big East, so we're, I guess, between us and Marquette and DePaul, we're kind of the outliers geographically. But in terms of actual schools, I think we're pretty comparable to all of our conference peers aside from UConn. UConn's the only state school that is in the Big East, and they have FBS football. So that, along with other things that make them different, that is a glaring one just from the makeup of our conference. But I like where we sit in the world. I like our department. I think we've got good leadership and people generally pulling in the same direction. Not a ton of friction, or not that I feel as the person who has to enforce the rules. There's not a ton of friction, sure. Which I think is helpful for us, but we're all just trying to do things the right way.
Sweet. What has been the hardest challenge you faced during your time working in compliance, and how did you overcome it?
I think I haven't made a lot of transitions between jobs, but I think it's hard when you have, I'll just say, turnover in general, whether that's me going from Ball State to here. I didn't know anybody, so I had to you got to foster your own relationships. I can't just mooch off of my boss's relationships because she's been here for 10 years. I've got to forge my own path, and I would say that's the same at any, when you're going to a new job. Another area that can be, and it kind of depends on sport, but turnover in coaching staffs is always, it is hard in a lot of ways. Logistically, you've got a whole new set of people, right, that you've got to learn and figure out how they tick. They got to figure out how you tick. Butler is a lot different than other schools, so there's some catch up that has to go with that. But then there's also the personality aspect too. So it's just I got to figure out how you tick so that we can kind of get along. And then there's the emotional side of it too. You build relationships with the people who have moved on for whatever reason, whether they got a new job or there was a change in staff. You build relationships with those folks. So I think that can be hard. I've never been a part of a major violation, so I would like to keep it that way. So in terms of actual really hard compliance things, I would like to continue to avoid that. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been hard times. We all come across with conflict. And, with the House settlement and what that means for athletics, I think we're headed into a place that could bring about some hard times for our industry. And, we got to figure that out. I don't think we're there yet.
No.
I don't think we don't
Yeah.
understand the scope and scale yet. So the hard times haven't come, but we also have to be realistic of, you know, our industry and
Yeah.
what we know of as Division I college sports is going to look different
Mhm.
over the next 18 months. So
Yeah.
that could be an upcoming hard moment.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
Well, this is a perfect transition. Where do you see compliance heading in the coming years that could impact you or the department? And what do you think the future of compliance in athletics will look like?
My husband jokes about this, but I think there's always going to be rules.
Yeah.
Period.
Mhm.
Right? Whether that's from an organization like the NCAA or that means federal intervention with something like an NIL bill. I think there's always going to be rules to keep the thing running.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you see it in the NFL, you see it in MLB, like they've got, whether it's a CBA or whatever their NFL policies and procedures of like how things are supposed to operate. There's always going to be rules.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, I feel hopeful that I will continue to have a job, that I'll
Yeah.
continue to have a job. But I think it's going to look different. I think it depends on, you know, what we see as a student athlete
Mm-hmm.
could look different. Whether that's some sports becoming more of an employee sort of a scenario rather than a student athlete is what we know of them right now. I just think there's a lot of room for change, and compliance is going to have to change with that because the rules are going to change. They're going to
Yeah.
change quickly. We've got to find ways to be nimble, and whether that's our policies and procedures, technologies that we're using, advising from a risk management standpoint, like all of that, I
Mm-hmm.
feel confident that we're going to have to still be involved and be relevant within the system because I think there's always going to be rules.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it just may not be an NCAA manual. It could be, I don't know, legal statute. We'll
Yeah.
see.
Mm-hmm. If applicable, if not, it's
Yeah.
okay. Is there a way you incorporate feedback from coaches and athletes into developing policies?
Yeah, I mean, and I hope our coaches believe it, but I tell them, like, if there's something that's not working for you, tell me. You know, we've moved a lot of our formal procedures that used to be done on paper, we've moved them electronically to like a Qualtrics kind of a surveying function
Okay.
that we receive. And I really do mean it when I tell our coaches, like, if there's something that we're doing that doesn't work for you, let's have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I'm going to change,
Yeah,
drastically
of course.
change what we're going to do for one specific team when it's working for the 17 others.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's a way that we can be more, like meet the coaches where they're
Mm-hmm.
at, whatever that means for the specific scenario, yeah, I absolutely want to know that because my policies and procedures have to involve them.
Yeah.
And if I don't want to hear them gripe and complain about it, if it really doesn't work for them, you know, coaches tend to not like doing data entry. I don't
Mhm.
like doing data entry either. But there is an administrative part of being a coach.
Mhm.
So they can't ignore us because
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
hold the keys to just about anything we
Mhm.
want to do. So yeah, we are asking for feedback from our coaches all the time, whether that's surveys or informally when I'm meeting with a coach and be like, hey, what do you think of the new, I put comp ticket requests online. Like, what do you think of the comp
Mhm.
ticket form? Does that work for you? Do you have any tweaks? Like, are you trying to do it on your phone, your computer, like what have you? We try to get their feedback where relevant. Ultimately, from an administrative standpoint, we're still going to make the decision on
Yeah, of
how a
course.
policy is written,
Mhm.
or how it applies. But I want to know where they're at. For the student athletes, we just as a department wide, we do exit surveys.
Okay.
And a lot of that is, compliance is one of the survey questions of like, how was your year with compliance? Do you have any feedback for compliance? But it also touches like, how is team management, like all the things that come into play for a student athlete.
Mhm.
So, team management, meals, accommodations on the road, athletic training, strength and conditioning, academic support, like all of this sort of stuff we do survey surveys of our student athletes at the end of their competitive season.
Sure.
So we try to get that sort of data
Mhm.
from an administrative standpoint. And then if there was any feedback relevant to compliance, it would get forwarded to me to address, or if it's a one-off thing, I might go talk to the student of like, hey, you gave us some feedback, like what does this mean? Or, you know, kind of just taking notes of any tips or trends that we're seeing from feedback. The students tend to not give a lot of feedback on compliance because we just are and exist,
exactly.
and we tell them to do things. So they seem fine with that with that arrangement. But yeah, if they have anything they want to tell us, my door is always open.
Mm-hmm.
All of them have access to my cell phone number. So
Sure. Okay. If you guys want to implement new policies, what is the process of doing that?
Yeah, it kind of depends on what the policy is.
Mhm.
There are some things that I can just make a decision on a whim. Not totally on a whim. But if it's, well, I guess I can use an example. So like moving our policies and procedures, moving some of those things electronic. I told my boss that I was doing it, and she was like, okay. So I just wrote it up in a way that's helpful to me. So like, this is our compliance page. All of this stuff tends to stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
I created a little coaches section, and so we manage the information on here, whether it's they have to this is where they get their practice log spreadsheet.
Okay.
Like I want everybody doing the same practice
Mm-hmm.
logs. I don't want 15 different versions of a Google Calendar.
Yeah.
So there are some kind of low-hanging fruit of things that I'm able to do just by myself, or in conjunction with my staff. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we talk about it as a staff. But then there are higher level things that, you know, we need to talk about. A lot of times that starts within compliance, going to my boss as the senior administrator over the compliance office, our senior staff, including our athletic director, or general counsel. There are a fair number of times that we need to talk to general counsel to make sure they're okay with it. If things are pretty solidly within NCAA rules, they kind of just want to be mildly aware of, like, we're rewriting the terms and conditions of our scholarship agreements. Like, all of that is NCAA rules heavy, but it's a contract binding the university to the student, so the lawyers want to take a look at it.
Yeah.
And then there are other things that may involve, like, the president's cabinet, which is like the VPs across campus of, you know, student life, all the different versions, and Grant, our athletic director, is the vice president. He's on that council. So it just kind of depends on where we're at in terms of little to big. But there are quite a few things that, like, if a rule changed and I just need to shift our policies and procedures, I try to make a reasonable decision.
Yeah.
A reasonable decision. We may try it out a couple of times. If it doesn't work, we'll tweak it. But, you know, if it's kind of easy, things like that, we can do that without the whole, like, structure and process.
Yeah, of course. How do you handle violations within the athletic department, and what steps must be taken in order to handle it properly in the eyes of the NCAA?
Sure. So we're built on a self-reporting system. That doesn't mean we don't find violations, but we all have an obligation to keep the rules. And part of, you'll see it written as the promoting an atmosphere of compliance. That's where the self-reporting piece of it comes in. This is something we tell our coaches all the time and our student athletes. It's like, if you see something and it feels weird, just come ask me. We do get a lot of self-report, and I'm appreciative of this. We get a lot of self-reported violations. Not a lot, but consistently across the year, we get self-reported violations from our coaches or administrators, things like that. That means, like, the policies and procedures are working. They understand that compliance is a thing and rules are a thing. But me and my staff, we also do a fair amount of auditing. So whether that's auditing official visits and making sure all the receipts match what you told us you're going to spend the money on, or match what you're allowed to spend the money on, things like that. So we can discover violations as well. But self-report versus discover are kind of like the two ways that you find things.
Yeah.
And then from there, we have to research and make sure it's a violation. Assuming it is, we try to stop the bleeding, whatever that means for the specific scenario. Whether, if somebody drops below full time and they're practicing, I will yank you out of practice as fast as I can to stop the bleeding of a rules violation in that way. And the NCAA expects that of us. They expect us to take reasonable mitigation steps whenever we can. And then we're supposed to report the violation and implement the punishment measures. The punishment tends to be also includes rules education with your compliance staff in most things. So whether that's if a team went over practice hours, we'll tell them, hey, you got to take a 2-for-1 penalty, so the students have to sit out double of what they went over. Okay. We'll educate the coaches on the rule that they violated, how and what the remedial measures are. That includes their sports supervisor. And then at the next rules education meeting with all of our coaches, I try to include those sorts of topics. Not to embarrass our staff or anything, but I think it's just good reminders of like, hey, you're going into when you're coming out of in-season segment, when you're 20 hours a week and you're going into 8, make sure that you know where that mark is so you're not going over hours. Something like that. Those things are applicable to all of our teams, and it's good for everybody to know. I'm not saying you swimming, you violated this rule, wear the cone of shame, but it's good information for everybody to know. And that's how we handle it. We report within a timely manner. There's not really a solid requirement of like you have to report within 10 days of discovery or something like that, but once we've finished our kind of internal investigation or our internal procedure, then I don't want to just let those sit. I want to submit them, get them over with. I don't want to forget any of the facts. I tend to put things in my calendar of like, this was the date of discovery.
Okay.
Or make a running Word document if something is super complicated. If it involves, where I've got to interview students or coaches, I definitely put that stuff in my calendar so that it's documented in contemporaneously. But all of that stuff gets written up into a violation report that we submit to the NCAA. We do have the discretion to get our conference office involved whenever we feel necessary. Sometimes that's just bouncing the scenario off of them, and they're helpful in that way. The Big East has policies, but we don't necessarily have a violation reporting structure. Some other conferences like the MAC does, actually, in kind of an annoying way. But, when we go to the conference office, they're not necessarily looking to hand down their own set of penalties, but they're here to support us. If they think that our remedial measure is not in line with what it should be, they're able to see our violations that we report and they can add conference action. Never had that happen, but they have the ability to if they wanted to. And if things are big enough, sometimes you have to go to outside counsel. So you hire a law firm that comes in and mostly does the things that I would be doing from an investigation standpoint, but it's handled by the law firm. They tend, if you get to that point, I would probably help identify the issues and let them know what happened, kind of the immediate reaction, and then I would help them get the documents they need or schedule the interviews that they need to do, things like that. But they would be the people talking to our conference office or to enforcement, mostly enforcement, on our behalf. We would be their clients. They're representing us in an enforcement action. So we also have that option if we need to.
No, sweet.
Those are only for big things, though.
Yeah. What makes handling a violation go smoothly, and what makes it a challenge?
If people disagree whether a violation took place or not is a challenge.
Yeah.
And there can be times where reasonable minds can differ on whether a violation has actually taken place or not.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an area of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, and this is something I really appreciate here at Butler, is our coaches, even if we have to have a tough conversation of like they did something wrong,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they didn't do it intentionally, but they did something wrong, I feel comfortable being able to have that conversation with our coaches.
Okay.
They can disagree whether they did something wrong or not, so there's an area of conflict, but it's helpful when we all are kind of talking the same language and understand, yeah, I messed that one up. Like, okay, let's identify the issue and move forward.
Yep.
I'm not here to like shame you or anything like that, but like I need the information so we can process and move forward. So in terms of a violation, like I think those can be it's kind of like the interpersonal communication spots that can make things easier rather than harder. There could be scenarios where getting the information you need is just difficult, whether that's, say you need to talk to a booster or a community member and they just refuse to answer your emails or talk to you. I don't have subpoena power, I can't make you talk to me. Student athletes and coaches, I can make you talk to me through various mechanisms, so that doesn't tend to be an issue, but it's these other people that kind of like, you're not, you might be a Butler fan, you might be a Butler booster, but if you're involved in a violation, it's like, I don't really have to talk to you.
Yeah.
So that could be a little bit difficult, but I don't run into those situations very often.
Sweet.
Thankfully.
How do you guys encourage people to speak up about potential violations that you may not otherwise hear about?
I just try to be around and be friendly.
Okay.
I really think, I mean, there's the issue spotting, problem solving, puzzles portion of compliance, but I think that a lot of what we do is interpersonal.
Yeah.
So whether that's, and I tell it to our coaches and I mean it, like my door is generally open. I want to be approachable. Like I'm not a pushover, like you're not going to take advantage of me, but I also want to be able to build a relationship where we can talk about things even if it's hard. So, little touch points where like I want to build a relationship with you as a person, get into a little bit of a vibe, a little bit of a zone with us. We go down to practice, not a ton. We should probably go more, but it's hard to find the time.
Yeah.
And we're all over the place, but we try to go to practice and let the students know that we exist and we're not these people that just wear the police hat all the time. If I need to travel with a team, I would have the support of our administration to do that if I needed to. Try to go to as many games as I can. Also like supporting our students and things like that. So all of that goes into relationship building and I think is a really important part of what we do that's outside of this desk or outside of my office. Because there are going to be times where something hard has happened or is about to happen and we need to be able to have a serious conversation about it, and it's one of those times of just like, don't like cut through the bullshit, like we need to talk through what is happening, what our problem is, and how we get to a solution. So I find that easier if I've already got kind of a base level relationship with our coaches and our students. Not that I'm going to be your best friend, but like I want to have like a base level relationship with you so that we can do things a little easier later.
What measures are taken to promote integrity within the athletic department? I feel like you kind of touched on this already. Kind of building relationships
and our athletic director, Grant is in his first year, but our former athletic director was the same way we have the Butler way plastered on everything, but we are going to do things the right way. So I have his support I've got senior staff support of like, if there's something happening, we're not taking a shortcut. We're not doing something that's convenient. We're going to do it the right way. Let's have a conversation about it. You can be upset about it, but we're going to handle it the right way. And he leads off most staff meetings with some version of that. Maybe not like, everybody make sure you do compliance right, but it just kind of is echoed across our department. You know, we're going to treat our patrons the right way. We're going to treat our student athletes the right way. You know, we're going to do things the right way. And that's just a standard that is set here and obviously has implications in compliance. So, yeah.
Absolutely. What has been the biggest learning experience in your role?
In my current role here at Butler, I had only worked at bigger state schools, and that there's a learning curve from going to a bigger state school to a smaller liberal arts kind of a school. So in my current role, I think that has been the biggest learning curve over my 2.5 years going into my third academic year. Because there's just policies and procedures that are the Butler quirks that may not have been the same at a Ball State or a Utah State or anywhere else. So learning all of that, learning mostly the Butler specific stuff. The NCAA things obviously are consistent across the country, but it's the institutional differences that come into play. That tend to be the biggest pieces.
Is there a way you guys measure the effectiveness of your training programs?
No, I wish there was.
No.
I don't want them to score me. I guess on my performance review, my supervisor probably asks for feedback on me and our compliance program. And when I'm doing Anya and Melinda's performance reviews, they work with specific teams, so we'll reach out to the coaches to see if they have any feedback. That's more of like a personnel normal thing to do. But we don't have like a customer service survey of this transaction was 4 smileys versus 5, or anything like that. But I would hope that if there was something wrong, I think if there was something drastically wrong, they would go talk to my boss or they would go talk to the athletic director. But I think we're able to avoid some of that with being good customer service representatives and trying to be forward thinking and forward looking rather than reactive when we can. So.
All right. And then the last question I have for you is, what advice would you give to someone interested in a career in compliance?
It's not for the faint of heart. I think it's can be a hard industry because it's built on conflict. Can be built on conflict. Doesn't have to be. But somebody's got to enforce the rules. There is an enforcement portion of this on campus, and that's part of our charge. But I think it's how you, like your perspective of that. If you want to be the policeman guy, there are people out there that want to do that, and they want to be the policeman guy, and there are spaces for that. But you don't have to be that way. So I would say, maybe decide what route you want to take in that regard of what your perspective of it is. I am of the mindset, and I think Ryan at Ball State would agree, is we're here to help solve problems and be advocates for our coaches and our student athletes. And we're a customer service based office, and that's the perspective that I like to take. But you're gonna learn your own perspective once you kind of get into it. It's people can access the NCAA rules, you can print off the manual and read them and memorize them or whatever you want to do. But there's so much more to what we do than just encompassed in this what feels like 70,000 page book. It's dealing with the human beings and the real life situations. Sports is important to people. College is important to people. We're here to support the student, getting their degree. And I really take that to heart, is that is my role. I'm not good on the field. I can't help you get better with your jump shot. That's not my role.
but I do want you to get out of here with a Butler degree.
Mhm.
So I will do what I need to support you in that, with our students and our coaches, and I think our coaches are the same way. So.
Awesome. All right. Well.